The scramble for Africa when Europe carved up a continent. Here is a number that should stop you in your tracks. In 1870, only 10% of Africa was under European control. By 1914, just 44 years later, that figure had exploded to 90%. Think about that for a second. In less than half a century, an entire continent was carved up, conquered, and colonized. This wasn't gradual expansion. This was a land grab of unprecedented scale and speed. Welcome to the story of the scramble for Africa. And trust me, once you understand what really happened, you will never look at a map of Africa the same way again. The setup. Why Europe suddenly cared about Africa. Now you might be wondering, if Europeans had been trading with Africa for centuries, why the sudden rush in the 1880s? Great question. Picture this. It's the height of the Industrial Revolution. European factories are humming, demanding raw materials, rubber for bicycle tires and the new automobile industry, palm oil for soap and lubricants, copper for electrical wiring, gold and diamonds for wealth and status. And where could they find all this? Africa! But here's the kicker. Europeans barely knew what was in the African interior until explorers like David Livingstone started mapping the continent and sending back reports of unimaginable riches. Most European powers were content with coastal trading posts. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of the action. Add to this some good old-fashioned European rivalry. Germany had just unified and wanted to prove it belonged among the great powers. France wanted to expand after losing to Germany in 1870. Britain wanted to protect its route to India. Italy wanted respect. It was like a massive game of risk, except the stakes were real and millions of lives hung in the balance. The Berlin Conference, the meeting that changed everything. And then came the most audacious moment in colonial history. Picture 14 European men in fancy suits sitting around a horseshoe-shaped table in Berlin in November 1884. No Africans were invited, not one. Otto von Bismarck, Germany's Iron Chancellor, was hosting what would become known as the Berlin Conference. The official reason? To regulate trade and prevent European wars over African territories. The real reason? To establish the rules for carving up Africa. Here's what they decided. Any European power that wanted to claim African territory had to actually occupy and administer it. This was called the principle of effectivity. Sounds reasonable, right? Wrong. This basically gave Europeans a green light to invade, conquer, and brutally exploit African societies to legitimize their claims. They also declared the Congo and Niger rivers neutral zones for trade. How generous of them to make African rivers neutral, right? The players and their prizes. Let me break down who got what, because the numbers are staggering. Britain became the biggest winner, grabbing nearly 30% of Africa's population. They wanted to control a continuous line of territory from Egypt to South Africa, Cape to Cairo, and they pretty much got it. Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, the list goes on. France took about 15% of Africa's population, focusing on West and Central Africa. Their strategy was horizontal control across the continent, Senegal to Somalia. Belgium got the Congo Free State, which was 77 times larger than Belgium itself. But here is where the story gets really dark. The human cost. Leopold's horror show. Now we need to talk about King Leopold II of Belgium because his story reveals the true horror of the scramble for Africa. Leopold convinced the world he wanted to civilize and Christianize the Congo. He even called it the Congo Free State. Free! The reality was the complete opposite. Leopold turned the entire region into his personal labor camp. Here is how it worked. Villages were given rubber quotas. If they didn't meet them, Leopold's force publique, his private army, will cut off hands, feet, or kill family members as punishment. They even took women and children hostage to force men to collect rubber. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 10 million people in just the first 23 years of Leopold's rule. Some historians say it could be as high as 15 million. That is genocide level killing. All for rubber to make bicycle tires and industrial goods? One missionary wrote to Leopold's officials, "I was so moved by the people's stories that I took the liberty of promising them that in future you will only kill them for crimes they commit. Let that sink in." Promising people they would only be killed for actual crimes was considered merciful. African resistance. They didn't go down without a fight. But here is what your history textbook probably didn't emphasize enough. Africans fought back. Hard. The most famous victory came at Adwa, Ethiopia on March 1st, 1896. Emperor Menelik II and Empress Taitu mobilized 100,000 fighters from across Ethiopia to face the invading Italian army. The Italians thought they would steamroll through with the superior weapons and European military tactics. They were wrong. Dead wrong. The Ethiopians surrounded and destroyed the Italian forces. Over 6,000 Italian soldiers died and 3,800 were captured. It was a complete rout that forced Italy to recognize Ethiopian independence in the Treaty of Addis Ababa. Adwa became a symbol of hope across Africa and the African diaspora. It proved that European armies could be defeated. It inspired resistance movements from Ghana to South Africa. The Pan-African colors, green, yellow, and red, that you see on so many African flags today, they come from the Ethiopian flag, a tribute to the victory at Adwa. But Ethiopia was the exception. Most other African societies, the Ashanti, Zulu, Herero, Nama, and dozens of others, fought courageously, but were ultimately overwhelmed by European firepower and organization. The economic blueprint, extraction and exploitation. So what did Europeans actually do once they controlled Africa? They created what economists call an extractive economy. Let me explain what that means in practical terms. Before colonialism, African societies had diverse, complex economies. After the Scramble, everything was reorganized around one purpose: shipping raw materials to Europe and buying back manufactured goods. Cotton from Sudan, cocoa from Gold Coast in Ghana, copper from northern Rhodesia, Zambia, palm oil from Nigeria, it all flowed to European factories. The infrastructure they built, railway ports, roads, ran from resource areas straight to the coast. Nothing was designed to connect African communities to each other. This created what some scholars call export dependence. African economies became completely reliant on selling a few raw materials to European markets. Sounds familiar, right? Many African countries still struggle with this exact same pattern today. The borders, lines that still define the divide. Now let's talk about something that affects Africa to this day, the borders. When Europeans drew their lines on maps, they didn't care about existing kingdoms, ethnic groups, or natural boundaries. The Somali people got split between 5 different territories. The Ewe people ended up in 3 different colonies. The Mandinka Empire was carved up by river boundaries. In 1914, Africa had been divided into over 50 colonial territories. These borders split 177 ethnic groups across different colonies. Imagine your family, your tribe, your community suddenly being told you're now citizens of different countries. That is what happened to millions of Africans. The craziest part? When African countries gained independence in the 1960s, they kept these colonial borders. Why? Because they feared that redrawing them would cause even more wars and instability. The modern legacy: how the scramble still shapes Africa today. Here is where the story gets really contemporary. The scramble for Africa didn't end in 1914. Its effects are everywhere in modern Africa. Those artificial borders, they're still causing problems. Sudan and South Sudan, Somalia's fragmentation, conflicts in the Sahel, border disputes between Kenya and Somalia, many of these trace back to lines drawn in European conference rooms over a century ago. The extractive economy, still there. African countries still primarily export raw materials, oil, minerals, agricultural products, and import manufactured goods. That pattern established during the scramble has proven incredibly difficult to break. The infrastructure, railways and roads in many African countries still run from resource areas to ports, not between African cities. That's the colonial infrastructure model, still functioning today. But there's something else happening that is worth noting. What some call the new scramble for Africa. China, India, Brazil, and other emerging powers are now competing for African resources and markets. The players have changed, but the basic dynamic looks familiar. The untold stories and lasting questions. As we wrap up the story, let me leave you with some things to think about. First, the scramble for Africa was incredibly fast. 90% of a continent conquered in 44 years. That's breathtaking speed for such a massive undertaking. For comparison, it took Europeans 400 years to fully colonize the Americas. Second, the human cost was staggering. Between warfare, disease, forced labor, and outright genocide, the population loss was enormous. The Congo alone may have lost half its population. Third, African resistance was real and widespread. Hundreds of societies fought back. The story isn't just about European conquest, it's about African resistance, even when that resistance ultimately failed. Fourth, the economic and political structures created during the scramble still shape Africa today. When you read about conflicts in Africa, resource extraction, or economic challenges, you're often reading about the ongoing effects of decisions made in European capitals between 1884 and 1914. The big question. So here is the question I want to leave you with. What would Africa look like today if the scramble had never happened? Would African societies have industrialized on their own terms? Would the borders follow ethnic and cultural lines? Would African economies be more diversified and interconnected? Would the continent have avoided some of the conflicts that have plagued it since independence? We'll never know for sure, but understanding the scramble for Africa helps us understand why Africa's modern story is inseparable from this period of European conquest and colonization. The next time you look at a map of Africa, remember, those straight lines cutting through the continent aren't natural borders. They are the product of European ambition, African resistance, and a historical moment when the fate of 400 million people was decided by men who had never set foot on the continent they were dividing. The scramble for Africa wasn't just a historical event. It was a transformation that continues to shape our world today. And that's a story worth understanding, because the echoes of those 44 years are still reverberating across the globe. Thanks for watching. If you found the story compelling, let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like me to break down. And don't forget to subscribe. There are so many untold stories that deserve to be heard. See you next time.